Some days, when you look back on the politics of the last 15 years, one asks, did any of it mean anything? The Great Realignment, the rebirth of social democracy, the return of Marxism, the return of right populism, fascism on the internet. Did it mean a damn thing? After all, the policies and inequities that prompted Occupy are all exacerbated 12 years out from it. How do we deal with that? I've been kind of amazed looking at the polls and looking at the response I'm now getting from Kamala Harris defenders and the blue MAGA crowd about critiquing the politics of joy. And even some radicals have said that maybe I shouldn't worry about the aestheticization of politics, as if what aestheticization hides is not important, as if that wasn't a major point in our critique of liberal politics in the beginning of the 20th century. These people have read Benjamin and totally ignored his primary point. The aestheticization was usually a mask to hide war. Yet, I've seen nothing more than watching young people want to liquidate themselves into another campaign. And we can't even say that they're the same people who did it in 2008 or in 2012 or even in 2020. After all, one of the things about young people is there's always a fresh crop of them. Oh, well, for a little while at least. We reached peak college students about 2 years ago in the United States. Both demographic declines and fears that college isn't worth it anymore are leading increasingly to lower enrollments. And yet that is the key demographic for the Vibes and Hope worldview. When I was critiquing the politics of joy on Twitter, and I don't use Twitter much these days, I've been ill and don't have a lot of time for it, I got the strangest pushback from people who just a few months ago were often masquerading as radicals. That we needed the hope and joy to get boots on the ground to canvas. My brother in democracy, you don't need the canvas at this point. If people don't know where they stand, they're not going to know. And I promise you, the hope and change of the blue, no matter who crowd, and those who have decided that, well, as long as it's not Joe Biden, this will go a particular way. And like with Obama, it will have a particular backlash. One of the amazing things about the Kamala Harris campaign is it's not actually been all that competent on messaging. It's not promising all that much of anything. And yet, it has managed to revive the cipher of hope and change against an administration that Harris was a part of. When you believe in this faux Bonapartist notion that the executive is about the one personality sitting in the chair and not the regime which undergirds it, well, this is the kind of foolishness you can convince yourself of. Do Americans have a favorable opinion of Kamala Harris? Yes, because she's doing well against the second most unpopular president in modern American history, who is running again after losing their first term. And yet, that second most unpopular president in American history also received more votes than almost any other president who lost prior to him, because that is the nature of math. After all, we are a large but already peaked population. No, I've been surprised that radicals are getting on this. You just can't be bothered to care that there's going to be another fallout from the hopium phase, as if they have not learned. And these are people old enough to know. They came up with Occupy. They were probably in their 20s or late teens during Obama. Nothing has been done about the primary things ailing American life. But you think that running a 59-year-old will somehow bring back vitality to the White House. That's how much you've identified with political personalities. That's how much you've let fear of the other, the internal other, dominate your thinking. Yes, Americans hate politics. We've been in an anti political moment since the 1990s with a brief sway in the other direction during the aughts. The anti political moment ran smack dab into the war on terror and to the dot-com bubble and then to the 2007 recession. But the underlying antipathy that something hasn't changed our entire lifetimes and that the changes made during the 1970s are still delivering their goods, what you facilely sometimes call neoliberalism, but in some ways is larger than this, the neoliberal project, that ain't going away. And it hasn't been at all. So while I'm not on team Trump, maybe to the left of the Democrats, I think all that's somewhat irrelevant. The hard work of political change is not just about the executive, but people desperately want to believe that it is. And this is pushing my faith in anything like representative democracy or even new socialist republicanism. After all, the population is not stupid. So why do these bubbles of hopium keep emerging with no evidence that they have any substance at all? Harris was kept a cipher for the entirety of the last 3 years of the Biden campaign. Emerges from nothing and has managed to look like a change candidate while promising very little change, just not Donald Trump. Putting a stalwart populist progressive who isn't rich in the VP seat, one who could have credentials like Bernie. I've seen the left scramble to deal with this and imply Walz is somehow a Zionist. You have no evidence one way or the other. But I can tell you that even if he isn't, it doesn't particularly matter much because you're captured on that issue. Why? Well, Trump has even been alienating some of his anti-Zionist far right-wing base. You know, the reasons for being anti-Zionist are mixed, but largely anti-Semitism. By how vociferously pro-Israeli he's been. And there has been some truth to, if you care about Palestine, who else are you going to vote for? And if enough people aren't voting at all, even sitting it out doesn't matter. Voter turnout will likely be lower this time, but if there's anything that is predictive, the excitement's now on the Harris side. What is amazing is how competent they've been at being marginally competent. And that's all that's been required of them because people are afraid of Trump and they have no vision for the future. And they've pretty much all given it up without saying so. Do you see the Democratic Socialists getting out in the street? That Harris has already given up on single-payer health care or even significant ACA reform, even though she's talking about the healthcare crisis in America all the time. But in vague terms, often with inaccurate numbers. If you've given up on radical politics, own it. But many of you can't because you built your personal brands off of it. So now you have to pretend that doubling down on a centrist is somehow tied to your radical agenda. You know who I'm talking about. You know who you are. Many of you are young, and that's fair. We'll see where this goes. In the meanwhile, the entire politics of 2020 has seemed to go up in smoke. Various people around DI and CRT have been collapsed in scandals. Now I see some leftists trying to defend D'Angelo, but they couldn't defend ex-Kendi. D'Angelo's plagiarism scandal may be minor, and in fact, honestly, that's not the worst thing she's done. The worst thing she's done was selling racial liberation to HR as a way to make white people feel good about their own guilt. Effectively, her collapse now has already fallen. I hear very little people referencing white fragility anymore seriously, and even the people critiquing it seem to have oddly been 2 to 3 years out of date. So what was all this for? For you to go back to the hope and change of the Obama years with an even more nebulous candidate with even more ties to the status quo? And the answer to that seems to be yes. And no, that's not all my audience, but it's not none of it. And the Democrats have been competent in playing this, and Trump has been particularly incompetent. He's been off message after being on message for a while during the great Biden sundowning event. But the Democrats and the Harris campaign will pay nothing for the fact that they actively hid that from the American public. They will pay nothing for the fact that they actively use extrajudicial power to convince social media to moderate harder than they probably should have. And when I point these things out, I will be told those are right-wing talking points. Well, that's beside the point. Are they wrong? You see, I used to expect that at least liberals would admit the talking points of the other side when they were right, because when I was a teenager, the centrists were dying to do that. But now we're not even there. No, instead I see blue MAGA people shaming that people don't know what inflation is and that the average person in America can't tell you the price of milk in 2019, which, by the way, was a little over $3 on average. And yes, I remember it. And depending on where you're at, it's $5 to $7 now. The preposition of a lot of the Harris most rabid and radical is that the general populace is stupid, that they don't understand what's going on, and that the experts should be in control, while also talking about the politics of joy. And at least they've stopped the hyperbole about the failure of democracy, because they know it wasn't fucking working. Everyone's afraid of democracy dying, but no one agrees on what it fucking is. So I'll give the Harris campaign a lot of credit for that. But the rest of you, radicals chastising me for being too hard on the politics of joy because Harris needs to get boots on the ground because we got to defeat Trump. Oh, we need to defend DEI against right-wingers. Look, there are reasons why people, even union people, ask for diversity and inclusion stuff. There's also reasons why certain workers in certain areas hate it. It depends on the field and depends on how it's being used. It is not a simple question of just a capitalist conspiracy organically from the workers. Almost nothing is that fucking simple, you fucking children. And now people mock me when I say that you need sterner stuff than the politics of hope. In 2016, I predicted that we would live in a time of presidents that were 3 years, 4 years in the making. By that, I meant that we'd have a lot of one-term presidents for a variety of reasons, because the 70s was a similar transition period with similar instability, with a bunch of one-term presidents for a variety of reasons. But we also have to look deeper into our history, into this faux Bonapartism that's emerging. This belief in the executive despite all the proof of its limitations. And that's not just a thing in America. Nor is it really just deemed America where the empty suit liberals somehow manage to maintain. I don't know how Trudeau is still in power in Canada, given his massive unpopularity. Stammer is less popular than Harris relative constituency, and believe it or not, Labor did less well in the actual electoral vote on its own standard under Stammer than under Corbyn, but its opposition was more disunified, more falling apart, and so they were able to sweep in. One of the things that both the left and liberals have been counting on is that the right is more unified than ever. The right has a figure, a demagogue that stands in the center because it isn't unified. But now that I see that the American left seems to be, at least 50% of it, okay with doing the same thing with centrist in the Democratic Party, who may throw progressive a few bones, but make sure their larger agenda doesn't go anywhere, and will have most of their politicians kiss the ring, while your institutions that came up in the Trump administration, the DSA, hemorrhage numbers in massive amounts. What are they now? 52K paper members with different chapters shuttering across the country, and an NPC that's divided against itself. Some wanting to claim how they influenced the Harris campaign and they pushed Harris to the left. Others wanting to focus on international issues that they can do little about since they have no congressional power to do anything about it. I'm not a doomer generally, but I've hated the false hope of optimist. But today I might be a doomer. You guys may be onto another children's crusade, another binge on hopium, where the empty calories pay back again. And what do you think the price will be next time? Are you going to stay and push Harris to the left? I doubt it. You want to silence her critics on the left now, and you'll probably win. This is the politics of vapor and vibes, but it's also the politics of ashes, of people watching other people consumed by flames. If you don't think that's happening in the Middle East right now, and hasn't been happening in the Middle East right now almost the entire fucking time I've been alive. It's definitely been my entire adulthood. But what you don't realize is you're also in flames. Working class lifespans have been declining. It doesn't show up with people of color as much because, well, white people have been catching up to them. Inflation, no one has a handle on how to handle it because no one even can agree on what caused it this time. Law. The Democrats have done nothing about the Supreme Court and the undemocratic nature of our state. They have done little about outright illegal provocations from people like Kim Paxton in Texas because they don't want to fight that fight. If they don't want to fight that fight, what fight do you think they're willing to fight? And on one hand, the Harris campaign has been amazingly disciplined on message. On the other hand, their messages, I've listened to Harris speeches, are not particularly great. Yes, everyone's afraid of the old orange Cheeto Benito. And like I said, I'm not even saying they shouldn't be necessarily, but this is ridiculous. But I would expect this from normal Democrats. I don't expect it from leftists. But then, they've always liked children's crusades. It's been their primary MO since the 60s. Keep your peace. I don't know how much I have to say about electoral politics anymore.